Africa is known as the youngest continent. Over 60% of its population is under the age of 25. Such a young population can either be an advantage or a liability in terms of economic and political development. The Center for Security and Strategic Studies recently held a panel discussion examining what experts see as the impact of Africa's youth dividend and the possibilities of what can be gained as many of these countries fight their way to stable political systems and a middle-income status. The panel explored the ways in which insecurity and violent movements affect African youths, but most importantly, what they see as youth-led solutions to what are essentially African challenges. Patrick van der Laar is the National Director of the Student United for Reconstruction and Education in Liberia. He started his organization right after the civil war in his country.
We have been involved into the promotion of peace and unity among young people, leading them into developmental youth initiative, like through civic education, reminding them that war is not an option, so that the mistakes that were made yesterday by our past generation cannot be repeated by my generation. I think we are more refined, and we need to demonstrate to the world that we are today's leader and no longer future leader.
Mark Summers is the author of the new book, The Outcast Majority, War, Development and Youth in Africa. He says that youth are essentially dominant players in whatever takes place on the continent. However, it is important for people to note that most young people resist the pressure to join violent movements, even though the majority often feel a sense of alienation from what they see as elite-driven political and economic systems.
Everything that goes on is youth are involved. The youth were involved dominating peace building as well as the violent activities. But I should point out that even in situations where youth can really get involved, have a chance to get involved in violence or in war, most resist. And so the big question we should be asking is, why are most youth so peaceful?
The panelists agree that failure by governments across the continent to address some of the unique challenges faced by the youth has created a situation where they have to turn to what would otherwise be unconventional means of survival. Matthew Breman is the Africa Regional Director for International Youth Foundation. He says that there is a risk in the failure by governments to take advantage of this youth dividend.
From our vantage point, how do you use positive youth development and young people as this demographic dividend, as opposed to some of the stigmas attached to young people that they're inexperienced, they can't do this, they can't do that, they have to wait their turn.
Van der Laar agrees. He says that such failure opens doors to elements in society that often exploit many of these young people.
Many of the young people are unemployed, and when young people are not employed, as it is said in Africa, an idle mind is the devil's workshop. People can easily manipulate them.
But Ritu Sharma, the author of the book Teach a Woman to Fish, says that she is more interested in looking at why so many of the youth in Africa, even as they are faced with high levels of poverty and inequality, are able to resist engaging in violent activity.
99% plus of young people in the world are nonviolent and not interested in violence. And we want to look at some of the positive outliers. So the question for me is not, why are youth so violent? The question is, why are so many youth nonviolent, given the challenges that they face, particularly in Africa?
So the question really is, how do African countries use this demographic dividend to achieve the same progress that developed countries have had by going through what is known as a demographic transition, the kind of transition where largely rural societies transition to urban industrial societies? For Voice of America, I'm Jackson Mvunganyi.